many partners, including reducing coal, voters taking action on climate change, and local governments across the region, have been fighting efforts to expand thermal coal exports through our ports. And one of our major concerns, of course, has been the health effects, potential health effects of transporting that coal through our communities. But what we haven't thought about too much is what happens when that coal gets to market in Asia, in China in particular. And so it's my great pleasure that Dagwood has been able to partner as a partner in the Power Past Coal Coalition to work with Greenpeace to bring Calvin Quek to visit and give this talk today. So Calvin is the Director of, correct me if I'm wrong, Sustainable Finance with Greenpeace East Asia based in Beijing. And Greenpeace is one of our partners in Power Past Coal who's been fighting the expansion of coal exports all up and down the west coast of the U.S. and Canada. So working together, we were able to get Calvin here to bring us a first-hand account of what it's like to live and breathe air in China's cities these days, how some of the policy changes there recently could affect coal markets, and what that means for us here at home as we contemplate expanding exports from our ports. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Calvin, and then we'll have plenty of time afterwards for some discussion, questions, and answers, and hopefully open it up. So thanks again for coming, and thank you, Calvin.
Thanks, Laura. Laura, how much time should I talk? 20, 30 minutes, and then we do Q&A?
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. My name is Calvin Quek, and can you all hear me? I'm not sure if this mic is working, so it's great to be back here. I was actually born in Vancouver 36 years ago, but I grew up in Singapore my whole life, and I've been living in Beijing for the last 5 years, and I've been with Greenpeace for about 3 years. Prior to coming to Greenpeace, I actually worked for Citibank for about 10 years. So I come from a very different background compared to most Greenpeace campaigners. And I decided to make that switch because I've always wanted to fight for the environmental issues, but there wasn't much of an opportunity back in Singapore. But it's great to actually come back to Canada, to the birthplace, the city where Greenpeace was founded, and to speak to all of you today. So today's talk is actually going to be quite broad, and it's going to be quite detailed. In some sense, broad to try and connect what's happening out here with what's happening in China, but also detailed to give you some real perspective of what's happening on the ground in China. And I'd like to just start out by asking everybody, just by a show of hands, how many of you would actually consider yourself a China expert? Maybe speak Chinese or have a degree in Chinese history? Oh, okay, it's one person. And how many of you have actually maybe have been to China, have breathed the air? Okay. And then would it be fair to say that the rest of you are sort of China novices, is basically what you pick up from newspapers and so forth? Okay. All right. That's fine. So I live in Beijing, which is the capital of China. It's a city of about 25 million people. And it's the cultural, historical, and the political center of China. So what happens there has implication for the rest of the country. The country, which is 34 provinces large and encompasses a population larger than North America and Europe combined, 1.3 billion people. We have cities there, we have provinces there which have populations of above 60 to 70 million people. So it's important to understand that China is a continent unto itself. And each of the provinces within that country also have their own particular dynamics, much as the provinces here in Canada do. In China, we've been there for about 10 years, and we've been working on 5 main issues. The biggest issue we face there is climate and energy, the fact that China is overly relies on coal and thus is the world's largest global emissions country. We also work on forests. toxics, which relates to water pollution, food and agriculture, and finally our newest campaign, which is the Oceans Campaign. We have about 70 people working in Beijing, of which 95% of the staff is Chinese. If you actually went and visited our office in Beijing, I don't think you would actually recognize our Greenpeace office. It operates in a very different environment, a very different zeitgeist compared to liberal Western countries, so to speak. It is nominally a communist country, and it also carries with it the historical legacy of seeing itself more as a civilization rather than as a nation with modern creeds and a constitution and so forth. Now, last year, 2013, was an extremely interesting year for China. What we had was the new president and the new prime minister. And the president, his name is Mr. Xi, XI. And our prime minister is Mr. Li. Now, these guys, what happens is that they rose to the Communist Party and eventually assumed these positions in January of last year after a 30 or 40-year climb through the hierarchy. And they'll be there for the next 10 years. And if you just read kind of global newspapers about where Obama is, where the EU is, where Japan is, and so forth, most industry experts believe that these two people are probably going to be the most powerful global political leaders over the next 10 years, particularly as China's economy grows. Right now, it is the second largest economy on earth, and experts believe that within the next 20 or 30 years, it could actually exceed the US. Let's stay there for a second. Now, one thing that's very interesting about Chinese politics is that it can be very, very opaque. So we don't have Facebook, we don't have Twitter, we don't have YouTube, we don't have a free media, but we also have actually a very vibrant Chinese versions of Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and so forth. So within China, a population of 1.3 billion people, we have about 200 million people, 250 million people who are online and vibrantly talking about issues and so forth. And one of the things that Mr. Xi has come out saying that he wants to try and achieve for China over the next 10 years is the China Dream. Now, what is the China Dream? It's purposely designed to be both very aspirational but extremely vague, so that anybody can put anything under the table. But what is really interesting is that as these guys as their first year in office has progressed, they've talked increasingly about ecological harmony as being one of the tenets of this China Dream. The fact that Chinese people should be able to have access to clean water, clean air, and safety of food, and so forth. So you can't see this, but in about March of this year, about 2 months after these people were installed, the premier vowed to tackle the endemic pollution crisis that China faces. Now, here's just a snapshot of China, environmental issues in China. In 2012, I would say over the last 3 years in China, we've seen just an explosion in environmental protests happening across the country. And this is just the foreign media reporting, but this is actually covered very closely by the domestic media as well. Next slide, please. Research done by a Chinese university estimated that there were 90,000 mass incidents in China alone in 2011. Next slide. Whereas in the past, these environmental protests were sometimes subdued or kept quiet by the media, there wasn't much action and so forth, we actually have seen a huge change in 2013. Now, in June of 2012, the year prior, China actually warned a certain foreign embassy not to monitor pollution. This is actually air pollution information that was being provided by the US Embassy in China on Twitter publicly. Okay, and it showed this elevated levels of air pollution levels there. Next slide, please. Now, when air pollution hit crazy bad, in January of last year, 13 January 2013, there was an explosion of anger about this issue within China. So a city of 25 million people in Beijing, they're approaching middle class. It's beyond just the basic foods and, and drinks and so forth. Now they're aspirational, right? They want to try and drive SUVs and buy new things and perhaps try organic food and so forth. But they also want to make sure that they can breathe and that children can run around without having to have asthma affect them. So there was just a huge explosion on this issue on Twitter in China. Now, just to give you some sense of perspective, okay? So this is actually from a screenshot from my cell phone on the 13th of January, or the 12th of January 2013. This shows you two things. One is it shows you the AQI, the air quality, which is, say, 755. And it shows also the PM 2.5 level. Now, what is PM 2.5? PM stands for particulate matter, and 2.5 refers to the size of that particulate matter. And that stuff, and everything smaller than 2.5 micrometers, that's the measurement of that particulate matter. The WHO, the World Health Organization's standard for safe levels of prolonged exposure to PM 2.5 is 25. Okay? So we are talking about thousands of percent higher compared to what are considered to be safe levels in China, in Beijing. And you can see over here, just across the board, this is PM 2.5 levels across Beijing on that particular day. And in the urban areas on the eastern seaboard, and particularly to the north of China, PM 2.5 levels tend to be highly elevated. As you go south towards Guangzhou, Hong Kong, Hainan, and so forth, where there's less industrial activity, you see lower PM 2.5 levels. Now, this information, which I got on my cell phone, wasn't available to me in January of 2012. But it was available to me in January of 2013. And it had in large part to do with the fact that there was an explosion of this issue, which had been revealed to us by the US Embassy. Here is satellite. So here's a global picture of PM 2.5 levels across the globe. As you can see over here, this dark region over here, the red, where PM 2.5 levels average. This is actually over 4 years, and it's from 2001 to 2005. You can see over here, that's about close to about 80 micrograms per cubic meter in the northeastern region of China. Next slide, please. Remember how I said that this is a graph just to show you where the PM 2.5 levels have gone over the last 1 year in China. The dotted line over here refers to the national air quality standard, and that's actually 35. And the green line refers to the daily average of PM 2.5 levels in Beijing. And if I just looked at a running average of those, so I smoothed it out over time, so I wasn't looking at daily levels, which tend to fluctuate because of wind conditions and so forth. I looked at it at a 30-day running window. You can see here that the average level of air pollution in Beijing has never met its national air quality standard. Next slide. Same picture. Next slide. Now, what's the relationship between PM 2.5 and public health? Here's a graph that shows life expectancy versus PM 2.5. And this is a study done in the US from 1978 to 1982. As you can see over here, what they did was they plotted that, okay, for a particular PM 2.5 level, here's the life expectancy in that particular location. And they did what is called a scatter plot, and then they drew a line right through it. As you can see over here, as PM 2.5 levels increase, life expectancy starts to decrease. There's a negative correlation, a negative relationship between those two variables. Next slide. This is the reason why air pollution now is among one of the hottest topics among Chinese citizens in China. nearly 70% of citizens in Beijing, nearby Tianjin, and the province which surrounds Beijing, Hebei, they are unsatisfied with current air quality standards, based on a survey that we had done. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Now, we always, if you read newspapers about China, you hear a lot about food safety, you hear a lot about corruption, you hear a lot about unsafe working conditions for coal miners and so forth. What's really interesting over the last 1 or 2 years is that we've seen a switch from corruption and rising prices, whereas people used to be very concerned about these issues. Well, they are still concerned, but air pollution is starting to rise up on the agenda. You can see over here how rising prices has actually fallen down. So people can buy houses, can whatever, has actually fallen down relative to air pollution, which has increased quite significantly in China. Okay, where does air pollution come from? These are two slides, two pie charts that show you basically the same picture. Air pollution in PM 2.5 in China comes primarily from coal burning. 45% as surveyed by Deutsche Bank, and about 50% as surveyed by Macquarie Research, another bank from Australia. There's also the contribution from traffic emissions, car emissions, and industrial emissions as well. But primarily, the burning of coal, which is used for both thermal for heating, and also as a source of electricity, is the number one reason, the number one source for air pollution in China. Just to give you more perspective, China consumes about 3.2 billion tons of coal per year. 3.2 billion tons. The US consumes, if I'm not wrong, about 300 million. Okay? And China's role in the global coal market is extremely important. So anything that happens in China has an effect on global coal markets. This message has changed the dynamics of our campaign. Whereas in the past we would talk about the health effects about coal, the water effects of coal, as well as they are, the fact is we're also seeing a global trend where China is starting to decrease its use of coal and has an effect on countries which are exporting that commodity to China. Australia, India, US, and Canada. Here's a picture of China. We've got over 3,000 coal-fired power plants across the country. Now, why is China doing this? China doesn't have oil. China doesn't have significant amounts of gas reserves that it can tap easily. It's also a growing economy. If you look at a per capita basis on energy used per citizen, Chinese citizen, is lower, much lower compared to US and most of the developing world. China is home to a huge amount of coal reserves. It's the cheapest, most affordable, easiest, and dirtiest source of fuel available in the country. Next slide. Now, why is Beijing, this is Beijing over here, in the northeastern part of the country, so if you can imagine, like Japan's kind of over here. Why is Beijing's air so bad? Now, Beijing doesn't have major steel facilities, steel, glass, cement. It doesn't have huge coal power plants in the city itself. If you visit, you won't see that many smokestacks out there. But in the surrounding province, Hebei, it is just a huge center of industrial production in the northeast region. And in this province, Hebei, if you look at the top 10 most polluted cities in China, 6 of them are in Hebei. And why is that? Because Hebei is a major center for steel, cement, glass, brick building, and so forth. Now, what's cement, glass, and steel? What's that used for? Construction. Ever since the 2008 global financial crisis, China has been on an infrastructure boom, both to feed the growth of this economy, but also a key reason for that boom was the flooding of bank loans into the economy post the financial crisis. Now, what that means is that in 2008, we had a situation where the global economy was bad, right? The US was down, Europe was down. China, which had been exporting all of this stuff, was in a situation where it could not export that stuff anymore. So what the Chinese government did was a specific policy that we've got to make sure our economy keeps on growing, despite the fact that we don't have end demand for these products. A funny way of describing it is that the government decided, I'm going to pay somebody $50 to dig a hole, and I'm going to pay another person $50 to put the soil back into that hole. Okay? Because we have a situation where the Chinese economy has been growing at 7% to 8% per year over the last 10 years. Now, that's created expectation of future growth and so forth. We have a situation where 2 to 3 million university graduates are coming out into the workforce looking for jobs. This is a train that can't stop. So the Chinese government created this artificial market in some sense to make sure that the economy powered through the last 5 years. Next slide. Okay. Now, I'm not going to talk about solar power, but last year, when that explosion of air pollution happened in Beijing, what you had over the year and the months that followed was a succession of policies announced by Beijing about how it is going to deal with the air pollution issue. Now, it is, like I said before, China is an extremely large country with various provinces which fight, compete, and collaborate in various manners and so forth. It's a big ship to turn if you're going to say that we want to deal with air pollution, because air pollution is just the tip of an iceberg of issues. You're talking about cutting capacity down in major sectors that employ millions of people. So that requires a very strong leader at the top to push down those policies to the ground. We like to think of China as being a communist country where the force of the party can get everything done. The reality is there's a huge amount of entrenched interest against policies pushed out by Beijing. We have a Chinese proverb that we use to describe the situation, which is the mountains are high and the emperor is far, far away. And if you go to the provinces in the south of China, and Guangzhou and Hebei and so forth, you have that situation happening where the mountains are far and the emperor is far, far away. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, now, so a lot of pushback, a lot of discussion, and then suddenly, September 12th, we had a massive air pollution plan announced by Beijing. And it focused on 3 regions in Beijing. A northeast region called the Jingji region, which is over here. A Yangtze River Delta region, which encompasses Shanghai, which is sort of in the middle eastern part of the country. And then the Pearl River Delta region, which encompasses Hong Kong. Now, these 3 regions are home to China's growing middle class, where air pollution is a huge issue. So they mandated air pollution reduction levels cut across these regions. And not only did they mandate these levels, they also talked about how they were going to do this. And they said that we need to control coal consumptions, we need to deal with industrial and vehicle emissions, and we need to expand the use of renewable energy alternatives. This has a huge effect on global markets everywhere, particularly if China imports so much coal from the rest of the world. I mentioned to you that China consumes about 3.2 billion tons of coal per year. It is also extremely self-sufficient in coal. Of that 3.2 billion tons of coal which it consumes, about 3 billion tons it derives from its own resources. And then we have the 200 million tons which are coming in from overseas. Next slide, please. This is just to show you, remember I mentioned Hebei, that dirty, evil province that was surrounding Beijing? Here's the trajectory of coal consumption over the last several years. This is millions of tons, okay? This is millions of tons. This is where it's going to be based on the new announcements by the province on how they're going to deal with air pollution. So we have the air pollution reduction targets. In addition to that, we also have the targets for how much steel capacity, how much coal consumption we're going to reduce to reach that air pollution targets. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide. This is just to give you more perspective on the enormous consumption of coal in China. What I've done over here is I've put all of China's 34 provinces across the board and ranked them according to coal consumption in 2011 levels, okay? And so I mentioned Hebei. Hebei consumed about 300 million tons of coal in 2011. And the blue bars refer to Chinese provinces. The green bars refer to provinces Chinese provinces which have announced some kind of policies to deal with coal consumption, air pollution. And the orange refers to foreign countries. So Shandong, Inner Mongolia, Shanxi, Hebei, I mean, there's 6 or 7 of them consume more coal than Russia, Germany, South Africa, Japan, and so forth. And Brazil is all the way on the far right. So these are monsters. 34 monsters you're dealing with. Next slide. Okay, I'm going even deeper, so hang on tight. The Chinese government has announced this big, huge air pollution plan. They've cut it down to regions, right? And this is a particular region. That region encompasses cities and provinces. So we've got Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei, which are part of this region. And in addition to them having a targeted PM 2.5 drop as well, they also have a targeted capacity reduction as well. Next slide, please. One also for the Yangtze River Delta region and the Po River Delta region. Next slide. Next slide. Overcapacity has been a huge problem that China has been facing over the last several years. Overcapacity from where? Well, it's because you asked people to dig up that hole. Now we've got too many holes in the ground. We need to deal with it. When you have a situation when you're producing steel or cement or producing too much coal and so forth, and you have no end demand, the end result of that is that the prices of steel are going to fall, right? Because nobody's going to need that anymore. But if the banks keep on continue to finance these factories and keep them on the payroll, the reality is that you have what's called, economists call living dead companies, where they may be getting their funding from banks, but the end result is that they can't sell their products to anybody. So you have a situation that global resources prices have actually come off. And this is you might have picked up in the media in Canada about the whole China story of how it's reducing consumption. This is what it's all about. The fact that China has an overcapacity of a lot of very heavy industries across the board. Next slide. Oh, sorry, just one thing to note. When you have overcapacity, you have a situation where people were basically getting rich for the last several years, right? So getting people to change this has been extremely difficult for the central government. Remember how I said about the fact that the mountains are high and the mountains are high and the emperor is far, far away. Now that we have this air pollution issue on the table, the central government has the mandate, the popular will to push these policies out to the provinces. Whereas in the past, we said that, oh, okay, we've got too many coal power plants. We'll send our lowly Ministry of Environment Protection guy, we'll check it up a bit. But then the fact is that the Ministry of Environment Protection guy does not have much control over industrial policy. Coupled with the fact that his payroll comes from the local government, which does not report to Beijing, you have a situation where everybody pretends to be working, but nobody's doing anything. Okay, anyways, I digress. Okay, now with the cuts in coal, which we're going to see in China, it changes a story about China that investors and policymakers have been seeing in the last several years. So an endless growth in coal demand over the last several years is starting to change its trajectory as we go forward from 2013 upwards to 2020. Next slide. Tackling air pollution is leading to a huge structural shift in global coal markets. It's getting Wall Street bankers, investors, analysts who watch this industry to rethink their models. We have here reports. These are not from Greenpeace activists. These are from blue-blooded Wall Street banks. Citibank, Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, and Allianz Bernstein saying that it's the beginning at the end of coal. The unimaginable, we're actually going to see peak coal happening in China. Now, China's not going to get off coal anytime soon. As I said before, 70% of its energy and electricity comes from coal. But the fact is that the growth of coal demand is coming to a peak. Coal is at a crossroads. And also, if you have a situation where demand for coal is coming off, why would you invest in more thermal coal mining capacity? So Goldman Sachs is telling all of its clients, the window for thermal coal investment is closing. Next slide. This is something, a little secret I'll tell you guys. Greenpeace, we talk to the banks. We feed them information. We discuss. We don't do it publicly. But at the end of the day, the banks, they don't care where they get the information from, as long as it helps them to reduce risk or to make more money, right? That's the name of the game. And it's funny, as I mentioned before, I used to work in Citibank before I joined Greenpeace. And we used to get a lot of various kinds of NGOs talk to us and try to push us and so forth to not fund this, not fund that. And the understanding or the impression that the NGOs typically have is that it's us versus them, particularly in the wake of the global financial crisis, right? Us versus them, the 1% and so forth. But the banks don't care. It's not us versus them. Citibank wants to kill Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank wants to kill HSBC. HSBC wants to kill Goldman Sachs. That's the reality. I remember when I was in Citibank one year, our CEO said that our goal this year is to destroy HSBC because they're taking our credit card customers in APAC. It's not to destroy Greenpeace or our Dogwood initiative and so forth. They're fighting against each other. And the extent to which we can provide the information that helps them make better investment decisions, that help, which are aligned with our vision for China, the more successful we're going to be. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't campaign against them. We certainly do. But you can play that role. So, long story for basically what we did. Here's a piece by Deutsche Bank talking about how Beijing's big bang measures to fight air pollution were causing coal to be at a crossroads. Next slide, please. And as you can see over here at the bottom of this air pollution special, the authors would like to thank blah, 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 and I would like to thank Greenpeace and so forth. Right at the bottom, kept quiet. Okay. I mentioned the fact that when you have falling commodity prices, falling coal prices, why would you want to invest more money to build more mines and so forth? Here's what I'm talking about. This is a chart showing two different things. The blue bars refer to fixed asset investment. That means money that goes into coal mining in China, and what you've seen over the last several years. This dark line refers to the growth percentage. Okay, and you can see over here. This is the amount of money invested, and this is the growth percentage. In the first quarter of last year, you've seen a collapse of investment into new coal mining facility in China. Why? Because China wants to get off coal. China wants to, it's become more energy efficient. The housing bubble is done. China doesn't need as much bridges and so forth. So countries and cities and ports that are thinking about exporting into China natural resources have to really rethink their long-term plan. This has had, like, the Australians are in the same game as in Canada and so on. Australia is nothing but tourism, agricultural products, and mining. And Australia, right now, its economy, which has ridden on the Chinese commodity boom over the last several years, is going to have to deal with this changing story. Next slide. Same picture again. This is from Goldman Sachs. The Chinese market is oversupplied. You have a situation where prices are falling. This purple line refers to renminbi per ton for a particular type of coal, which is falling. But you also have production staying flat, roughly flat over the last several years. Now, if you're producing the same level of something which is falling in price, you're not going to want to produce that anymore. So you have basically you have a flat investment in the sector in China. Coming off. Next slide. Now, what is the biggest barometer, the biggest way to measure whether your story makes sense to investors? At the end of the day, it's stock prices. How much companies are worth. If you look at these two charts over here, we've got Chinese coal company performance over the last year. And you see, and this red line refers to the index. So the index which measures all coal companies in China. And you see here coal companies, their stock prices have actually underperformed the index. On the flip side, the story is renewables, solar, wind, biogas, energy efficiency, and so forth. Here are 6 different companies which have outperformed the Chinese stock market. So you can make money based on this story. And that's the only reason why banks would write research reports on this particular topic. Because you write a particular research report, and then you can sell a product based on that research story. Next slide. So here it's rolling. Here's just a couple, last month. In December of this year, I'm going to finish up soon. We had a situation where air pollution was elevated in winter time. Air pollution is pretty bad now in China. Stocks have fallen. China's stocks fall as coal shares drop amid air pollution. And if you just Google how can I profit from air pollution, you just see so many different experts talking about this particular issue. Next slide. Okay, this is my last slide. This is the 18th of September last year, and it comes from Xinhua, which is the official press agency of the Communist Party of China. It said that regarding this issue of air pollution, all major economies in North China have pledged to deal with heavy smog that has caused people to worry about their health and undermine the realization of the Chinese dream. Remember that? It's extremely important because this is quite typical where in China they have a particular slogan, and that characterizes the thrust or the dogma that drives policy making. So this is continuing to happen. Next slide. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Hope this wasn't too crazy deep or whatever. Happy to take your questions. Thank you.